Welcome back to Country Cow Designs. I'm Jo and we make sewing tutorials for bag makers. So in this video I'm going to show you how to make this, which is the two-faced backpack. So we're calling this the two-faced backpack because it has two faces. It doesn't have a front and a back. So you can go ahead and wear it like that with the zip compartment on show, or you can also wear it like this. And in that case, then it's like an anti-theft backpack and people can't get in. So you can wear it either way around depending on the circumstances. It works perfectly both ways. The only difference you'll see is that your sliders will be the wrong way around one way. So in the pattern, we'll let you know when there's like the primary way, the way that you're going to wear it most often that you want people to see. Okay, so this is an advanced sewing pattern, so it's not going to be an easy one, but we're going to walk you through every single step. There's lots of things in this that you could skip if you wanted to, because we've got some new things. So on the side we have these expanding pockets, and they feature stretchy mesh fabric and fold over elastic and a little bit of raw edge fabric. If you want to make this bag easier for yourself, you could skip these pockets. That's absolutely fine. So these are great for things like bottle holders and things like that. So we've got those side pockets, and then on the inside, you'll notice all of mine are slightly different. So in the pattern, what we've got is this one here. We've got a phone slip pocket, so I'll just show you that. Then we've got 4 card slots, and inside we've got another stretch mesh pocket and a zip pocket as well. So all of these are optional. They're not going to affect the bag. If you decide that you just want to make it quick and easy without any pockets, or you want to change your pockets, that's absolutely fine. Now you will notice that we have some questionable binding. Now, I know how much you guys love binding, but we actually have some binding on the zip here. The reason we've done that is because of this being a whole circle. Okay, so if you've sewn a bag similar to this before, there's a lot of designs where it kind of goes straight down. And what you'll notice is that as you sew, the lining will end up coming out further down on the bottom, kind of like it's longer. So what happens is, because the lining's on the inside of the zip, it actually needs to be smaller, but we can't make this bit smaller because then it's going to mess up the rest of the panel. So I go into it a bit more detail in the preparation video if you want to hear all about that, but basically we've gone with binding. It gives a much better finish. It means that you don't get any wrinkles here, particularly on the lining. Everything just fits together so much better. But we do have the option in the pattern, if you really, really don't want to have binding, to do it without binding. Now, without binding, you are going to end up with some wrinkles on these corners for sure, and you will end up with some wrinkles showing on the outside, but I know that some of you absolutely don't want to do binding on a zip, so that is fine. So what more can I tell you about this bag? We've also got a little bottle holder elastic in here, which is just really handy if you want to keep your bottle on the inside of the bag. Yeah, I think that's about it. I would recommend using a cotton canvas for this front bit. Lots of curves with zips. It's going to be a lot easier. I used wax canvas for this one. I love it, but it was not as easy. So just bear that in mind when you're choosing your fabrics for your bag. Wax canvas will be harder, cork, things like that. If you're an advanced sewist, that's fine, but if you're starting out, definitely go with something nice and easy, something cotton. We've got some awesome photos from the testers, so go to the website. You can grab the pattern from countrycowdesigns.com, and you can click there to see all of the tester photos. They will give you loads of inspiration and ideas on what you can do with your bag. For this pattern, we're using foam stabilizer, but Adam did make this one, which just has a fleece and a slightly thick canvas. It's a bit more squishy, it's not so structured, it doesn't hold its shape quite as well, but it works brilliantly as a bag. So if you are using thicker materials, or you just really prefer like a slouchy look, go ahead and you could use some fusible fleece instead. I think that's everything. So let's get started. You can either just watch along and see what's involved, or if you want to sew along with me, you can go ahead and grab the sewing pattern from countrycowdesigns.com. Step 1 of the pattern is preparation. So the first thing that you need to do is print out your cutting chart, and it's 2 pages for this one. And you'll also need to cut out the pattern pieces out of paper and get all of your fabrics ready. So This is an advanced sewing pattern, and I do recommend for the second exterior fabric using a cotton fabric. It will make life so much easier when you're sewing the curves. So for my first exterior fabric, I have got this lightweight vinyl, but actually I'll work through all of the hardware and things first. So on one side of your cutting chart, you've got your notions to prepare. I've got my wide elastic for the bottle pocket. I have got my fold over elastic cut for my expanding side pockets. I've got my main zip tape and all my pocket zip tapes. I'm going to add the zip pulls to these later. And I've got the webbing for the straps. I've got my 2 rectangle rings and strap sliders, 1 inch each. So all of this is in the materials list for the pattern. I've got some rivets. These are optional, but I do like the way they look. And I've got my 5 zip pulls. For my binding, I am going to be using this waterproof canvas that I've cut into 1 inch strips. So I'll show you how I use that later, but you can just use standard 1/2 inch cotton bias binding if you like. Once the binding is completely folded and ready to fit, it should be 1/2 inch wide. So for my first exterior fabric, I've got this faux leather. So it's not super structured, but it's just a nice little faux leather. I have got this water resistant cotton canvas for the second exterior fabric. Now it says here where to add woven interfacing. So any cotton pieces, like this is a cotton canvas, so I'm going to add my interfacing. You can see I've already fitted that on the back. Fused that all in place. So that's for all of my second exterior fabric. For my accent fabric, I'm using cork. Your accent fabric needs to be cork, vinyl or leather because it's going to have some raw edges on show. So it does need to be a raw edge fabric. Then we've got the stretch mesh fabric. So I have got my stretch mesh, which I got from By Annie's. Make sure that you pay attention to the way that it stretches because it should be a 2-way stretch fabric, and the pattern piece will say which way the stretch should go. For my lining fabric, I've just got this striped cotton. Again, I've interfaced everything except for the one that is mentioned, the zip tab should have no interfacing for both the exterior and the lining. For my stabilizer, I'm using this foam stabilizer. A fusible one is advisable. It will be easier to use, especially for the gusset, but I don't have a fusible one on hand, so I'm going to show you how I attach this. You could use fabric glue or something like that to attach it, but I'm actually going to just sew it in place and leave the stitching on show on the lining. So if you've got really structured fabric for the exterior, perhaps wax canvas or something like that, or a cork that's quite heavy, you may want to reduce this foam to something like Thermolam. So all of these notes that I'm saying, they're like written on the pattern here. So when you look at stabilizers, it's got a little extra note just to let you know that. And then for my optional extra base stabilizer, I'm using Peltex. This is almost a little bit like cardboardy type feel. This is optional, but if you want like a really sturdy base, because I love a sturdy base, then yep, go ahead and add this. So still in this preparation section, we are going to add the stabilizer to the lining gusset. So the lining gusset is different to the exterior because the exterior has a join in it. So bear that in mind. We have to fit this stabilizer to the lining. Now what you should have is a fusible stabilizer, and you can just fuse it centered, so it will be about 1/2 inch in on each side, and you're just going to fuse it. If you don't have fusible, you can use something that will hold it in place temporarily until the bag is assembled, so perhaps double-sided tape or fabric glue, but check on your fabric how the glue reacts before you do that. Alternatively, you can do what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to sew this in place, and then the stitching is going to be on show inside the bag. So a lot of people won't like the look of this, but for me, I don't mind it at all, and it's a nice way to make sure that my stabilizer is going to stay in place, give me a nice easy assembly. So I realise that's an unorthodox method for attaching the foam to the lining, but for me, I'm absolutely fine with having that stitching on show, and that's going to hold it in place nicely. Of course, if you have fusible foam or you want to attach it using glue, that should work just as well. Next, we need to attach the foam stabilizer to the remaining exterior pieces. So that will be your main panel, which should have foam basted to it, the main closure, and the frame. This one's a little bit more tricky, but you need to make sure that you baste the inside and the outside edges. Once that's all done, what you're going to do is grab all of your pattern pieces, exterior and lining, and you're going to mark the centers top and bottom on each pattern piece. This is really important to make the sew easier, and you're going to do the same thing on your zip as well, your main zip. You want to make sure that you mark the center on that too. Then we're going to go ahead and move on to step 2 and get sewing. Step 2 is the expanding pockets. For this step, you're going to need your accent top trims and bottom trims, your first and second exterior fabrics for the expanding pocket, and you're going to need your 4 lining pieces, 2 pieces of mesh, 2 pieces of fold over elastic, and the 2 9-inch zips with a zip pull for each. So the first thing we're going to do is on the zips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure and mark 1 inch down. I'm just going to mark the edges of the zip tape, so it's going to be hidden in the seams later. And we're going to do this for both zips. So what we're going to do for each of these, we're going to separate the zip at the top, and I'm going to use a hand needle for mine so you can see it on camera, but what I'm going to do is just pinch it right on the mark, and that's going to create a 90-degree angle on the zip. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that's sitting nice and neat, and then I'm going to sew a couple of stitches to hold that in place. So you could sew this on your machine instead, just with a couple of stitches. We just want to keep it in place for now. So on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pinch that mark, and that will create a nice fold. Make sure that your folds are equal, so it's nice and equal there with the zip teeth, and then secure that one in place. Now I'm going to trim the overhang so the zip is the same width all the way up. And I'm going to use a lighter on the edge of the zip where I've just cut it, because this is a nylon zip and this will just help stop it from fraying in the future because it kind of melts the end. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other zip. Now set this aside for a moment and grab your 2 mesh pocket pieces, and you're also going to want your fold over elastic. So the way I've always presumed this to be is that the shiny side is the wrong side of the fold over elastic, although I haven't read anything that actually specifies that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fit a little bit of Fabri-Tac glue to the elastic. Now, I don't find that double-sided tape works for this because it won't stretch with it, so that's why I'm using glue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place the top edge of this pocket, so the pocket is taller than it is wide. I'm going to place the top edge centered on the elastic. Fold just the center bit is the bit that we want to concentrate on, so just fold the center bit around and clip that in place. Okay, now we need to get the ends matched up, so I'm going to match up this end first. As you fold it down, just make sure that it matches so you can't see the back part of the elastic sticking through. And then you're going to stretch it so that the pocket goes into the elastic like that, and add some more clips. So you want to do this reasonably quickly because you don't want your fabric glue to dry completely on you before you've stretched it. But I do find you do have a little bit of time to sort it out. Just don't walk away from it and leave it for a few minutes. There we go. So I'm going to do the same thing for the other one, and then I'm going to top stitch both of them along this open edge here using about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And what I'm going to do, you'll see I'm going to kind of stretch it as I put it through the machine to make sure that the stitches are getting it at its longest length, so that when the pocket stretches, my stitches aren't going to break, because I don't have a stretch stitch option on my machine. Now that those are stitched, we're just going to set them aside, and we're going to grab the first exterior fabric pieces. So when these pockets are finished, what we want is for the pockets to be opposite ways round. So one of them's going to have first exterior on the right, one's going to have it on the left. So just bear that in mind as we're making these, because we want them to match the gusset on both sides. Okay, so we're going to grab a zip and fit a zip to each first exterior piece, and you're going to make sure that it matches up on this bottom edge down here and clip it to the side, and you will have a small gap at the top. Okay, so you can see that my zips are on opposite sides. One's on the left, one's on the right. That's correct. Now you want to grab your mesh and you want to place that on top. Now this is going to line up with this bottom edge here, and the folder of elastic should be below the teeth. Okay, so we're just going to clip that in place. So for both of these, the mesh is coming across the fabric piece. Now we're just going to baste those in place. Now we're going to grab a lining piece and place that right side down. So it's right sides together with the exterior piece, but in between that you've got the zip and the mesh. Match it up to that exterior piece and clip it in place. Now we're going to sew this with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and to get that seam allowance I'm going to change over to my narrow presser foot, or you may prefer to use a zip foot. Okay, so now that those are done, what you want to do is you want to press the fabrics away from the zip. Now I'm going to use a seam roller because I don't really want to use my iron on this faux leather, but if you are using cottons or any other fabric that doesn't mind heat, then go ahead and use the iron to press these. So you want to make sure you've got like a nice neat and even press all the way around, and your fabrics are going that way, but your mesh is coming this way, so it's coming across underneath the zip. So I'm just going to clip this all the way around. Once you're happy with those, what we're going to do is top stitch down this edge here, and then we're going to baste the remaining 3 sides. Before you go any further, just double check that yours looks like this, that you've got a zip on the left for one of them and a zip on the right for the other. You just want to make sure that your pockets are opposite to each other and that they're going to come out correctly at the end. For top stitching and basting, we use an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I tend to use about a size 5 stitch length. When you're sewing this bit, you should not be sewing through the mesh fabric. That should be completely out of the way. Okay, so now that those are done, what we're going to do is we're going to put the mesh under the bit that you just constructed. Okay, and just clip it, because you do not want it to get caught in the next, few steps. This will keep it out of our way. Now, if you're panicking about these raw edges, don't worry, they're going to be covered later. And the zip pull we're going to put on later as well. So grab your 2 second exterior fabric pieces, and we're going to put them on the other side of the zip. So I'm going to place it right sides together with the zip, line up that bottom edge with everything else that you've already sewn, and clip those together. And if you have a directional print like I do, just make sure that it's pointing up the correct way. And we're just going to baste that in place. So now what we're going to do, we're going to turn them over and you're going to pull the mesh back around so that it's on the side of the zip that you've just been sewing. Okay, so again, you're going to match up with the bottom edge of this zip here and then clip it in place. And the fold over elastic should be below the teeth. And to this same side, what we're going to do is add your next lining piece. So I'm going to clip that in there. So it's right sides down on the back of the zip. And you've got the mesh between the lining and the zip. So the same with this one. The lining's going to go right side down. It's actually going to end up right sides together with the other lining, but the mesh will be in between. And we're going to sew this with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do is we're going to push the fabrics away from the zip again. Because what we want to do is top stitch. Now, when you're top stitching, you don't want to be going through the mesh. So pull the mesh over to the side that you top stitched earlier and just clip that in place so that you don't accidentally sew through it. And I'm going to turn that over and press this side too. Clip the lining and the exterior together. And we're going to top stitch along here, and then we're going to baste these 3 open edges, and we're going to do the exact same thing with this one. But again, just before you top stitch this, just check that you're not going to be sewing through your mesh. Make sure that it's over the other side. Now it's time to fit your zip pulls. So it's going to be slightly more difficult, you know, now that the pocket is assembled, but it's much easier than to top stitch and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pull it open a little bit at the bottom, put the rounded end of the zip on, one side at a time, and then you just kind of want to make sure it's equal as it goes on, like that it's going on equally on both sides. Pop it on a flat surface, hold down and give it a pull. And just like that, you've got your zip pull on. If your zip goes on wonky and it's not sitting correctly at the top, just take it off and try again. Now, if you've got any little bits like this, like I have, where one of the fabrics is stretched a little bit more than the other, just trim it down so that it's nice and flat all the way around. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put this mesh flat on the back. You want it to be equal on both sides, and then clip that to the bottom, and we're just going to baste it so that it stays in place. Do the same thing for both pockets. Okay, so both my pockets are ready. Now what I'm going to do is grab the 2 bottom trim pieces. Now you can see I've already drawn a line down the center on each one, and then I'm going to use a little bit of double-sided tape because I want this to stay in place when I'm sewing it. I'm going to put a bit on each side, and then we'll just fit one side at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this on the trim. If they're a slightly different size, don't worry, just center it. It can happen if you've used a different sort of a different seam allowance on your zip or something like that. Not a big problem. Okay, so mine fits perfectly. Now what I'm going to do is remove that side. And then pull it over so that raw seam is covered. Going to add a couple clips just to be sure that it stays in place. Then I'm going to sew this open edge here with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and it should be equal on both sides, so you should be catching both sides with that stitch. Do the same thing with the second pocket. So that's the bottom trim added. Now we're going to add the top trim. Now on all 4 of my pieces I've done the same thing as I did with the bottom. I've marked the center and added double-sided tape. Now we'll just to show you one pocket because they're both the exact same process. What we want is to fit it so that the long edge is on the exterior, and then this is going to fold around like that, and that's going to tuck over and hide it, and that way we don't have a raw edge here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take my tape off, undo my zip to give myself a bit more room, and I'm going to place that just below the line, and so that this long piece wraps around like this. Now, it might be a little bit too wide. I've left a little bit of extra room for anybody that used a smaller seam allowance on the zip, just because it's easier to then trim it down if you need to. Okay, so we're going to fold that down so that it covers the little tab. I'm going to add a clip as well. And then you're going to fold the rest down. There we go. And that's what your top trim is going to look like. So we'll do the exact same thing on the other side. So you should have opposing ones cut like that. If we cut them, two of them are mirrored, so that's how we've done that. Okay, so what you're going to do is, again, place this one exterior side down on the long tab, and then wrap that around. And bring that one down to cover it. Okay, I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew the open edges with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on both sides. So your last step here is just to trim any overhang that you have on your top trims, or if your bottom trim has a little bit, anything like that really, just trim it. You just want these pockets to be same size all the way up. That is your expanding pockets done. Now we'll move on to the next step. Step 3 is the card slots. If you're not having card slots, you can go ahead and skip to the next step. For this step, you are going to need your 2 lining card slot sides, and you're also going to need your main lining card slots piece. So flip your card slot piece over, and on the back, I've marked the bottom and the top so I don't forget which is which. And then I've measured and marked my lines. So this is all in the pattern, the distance between each line and where you need it to be. Then what we're going to do is we're going to grab this first line here. We're going to fold the fabric wrong sides together on that line. So you can just kind of pinch it like that. Make sure that it's straight on the edges, that it's lining up. And then I'm going to press that with the iron. Now that's pressed, what I'm going to do is fold it right sides together on the second line. So I'm just going to bring that over. And again, I'm going to press that with the iron, making sure that the edges are lining up nice and neat, because this will affect the end result. So now you've kind of got a slip pocket here, so then you know that you're doing it right. Now we're going to go wrong sides together on the third line. We're going to press that, and then we're going to go right sides together on the next line and wrong sides together, and we're going to keep doing that to create all of our pocket. So once all your lines are pressed, it's going to be about this size. It's going to be a lot smaller. So you can see here we have 2 small slip pockets and 1 large slip pocket. You're going to have it looking like that with the layers on the side, and underneath you're going to have these different layers. So just make sure that yours looks something like that. And it should be about 12.5 inches long. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch each of these folds. So as you do it, just pull it away from the main pocket. If you're wondering why my hands just got hairier, that's because Adam's come to help me with the sewing. Okay, so now that that's top stitched on each of those, what we want to do is mark for the card slots. Now, make sure that you're using an erasable fabric pen. So mine's an erasable one. And what we want to do is measure from 3 inches below this first fold, so 3 inches this way. And we're going to draw a line up. Now make sure that it's halfway. Now I don't want to split my back pocket because I want that to be for a phone. So what I'm going to do is pull this top section down, and then we're just going to sew up this line, back stitching well at the beginning and end. Make sure that you're using a stitch that matches your fabric colour, and I'm also going to clip the sides together to stop anything from moving. Okay, so unclip that, and you're going to bring the top section back up, so it's already got its fold there, so just find that again. Now I'm going to clip all of this together along the sides. And we're going to baste the sides just to make sure nothing moves around. Whichever direction you sew, sew the same way for both sides. If you sew from the bottom to the top on this side, you'll get a tiny bit of movement. And then if you sew from the top to bottom on this side, you'll get a tiny bit. You'll end up with your pocket being askew. So we're going to go from bottom to top on both sides. Now you need to grab your 2 card slot sides. So these are going to be shorter than your card slots. We just left a bit of room for manoeuvre really. You want to make sure that they're centered on this long edge and make sure that they're right sides together. So I'll clip those together. And then we're going to do the same thing with the remaining one on the other side. Now, if you have a directional print, make sure that your print is going to the top for all of these so that they match. We're going to sew each of these sides with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So this can get a little bit thick. If you're using a domestic machine, you might want to leave the interfacing out of like 1/2 inch on each side of the card slots, just if you want to give yourself a slightly easier sew. So what we're going to do now, we're going to push these side pieces away. Oh, that was an almost perfect match. So we're going to press that with the iron, do the same with this side to get a nice crisp finish. And then we're going to top stitch on the side pieces with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we're going to do that for both of them. Okay, now that that is sewn, grab your pattern piece E. Yours will look a little bit different because it's going to have the measurements and the join arrows, but this is your pattern piece E. Make sure that your pockets are the right way up. Okay, so this is your slip pocket and your card slots. You're going to place this on top. Make sure it is centered, so you might want to mark the centers on your pocket and the centers on your pattern piece. Match it up, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw all the way around the side and cut it to match this shape. And that's your card slots finished. Let's move on to the next step. Step 4 is the inner pockets. For this step you should have an 8-inch zip with 1 zip pull. You're going to have your slip pocket trim, which should be in cork, leather or vinyl. This is your accent fabric. You're going to have your stretch mesh inner pocket, your zip pocket facing, your 2 zip pocket lining pieces, and your main lining panel. So we're going to start with the slip pocket, and what we're going to do is draw a line down the center on the wrong side of the slip pocket trim. And I'm going to add some double-sided tape to the long edges of this trim. You could use fabric glue if you prefer. So I'm going to grab my stretch mesh pocket, and your pocket has a curved bottom and a straight edge at the top. So we're working on the straight edge. I'm going to center it on this trim, and I'm going to line it up with that line that I drew on the middle and just stick that in place. And you can fold this down and make sure that it matches neatly with the trim on the opposite side. because you don't want it to be showing from behind. I'm also going to add a couple of clips just to make sure this doesn't move around. And now we're going to sew this on with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on this open edge. So I'm just going to trim the excess here so that that top trim matches the rest of the pocket. Now grab your lining panel, and what you want to do is mark it 9 inches up on each side. This is easiest if you put it down on a grid mat and then measure, because the curves make it harder to, get it right. So place your mesh pocket on top, and you want to match the edges here with those 9-inch marks. And then you want to clip the rest of the pocket in place. So you will notice with lining slip pockets that because when the bag is finished, the lining kind of comes in a little bit, you kind of end up with saggy pockets. So to stop that from happening, what I actually like to do is just pull it a little bit tighter on this top edge. And for now, it will kind of look like it's pulling the main panel in, which is annoying. But when the bag's finished, it's actually going to stop it from sagging. So we're just going to baste this all the way around with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now you need to grab your zip pocket facing, and on the wrong side of the fabric, you need to draw this box. So what we're doing is we're just marking it 3/4 of an inch in from every edge to create a box. Then I've drawn a line down the middle, and it's got these little V's connecting it on the side. So all of this is in the pattern. So have a look at page 11 if you need the details. What we want to do now is place this onto the lining panel, and we want it to be 3.5 inches down from this top edge. Again, you're probably going to find this easiest if you use a grid mat, because then you can get your panel straight and you can count the inches down and mark it quite easily. So I've marked mine. This is an erasable fabric pen. Again, make sure it's erasable. I've also marked the center on my zip pocket facing. So match up those center marks, make sure it's on that line. You can also just double check that it's equal distances from the side so you know it's centered. And then I'm going to pin it in place. If you're using like a polyester waterproof canvas or something, make sure your pins are inside this box so that they're not, going to leave holes where they can be seen. Okay, we're going to take this over to the sewing machine. We're going to sew this outer box. And when you get to these corners, change down to a nice short stitch length. For cotton, I'm going down to about a 1 mil stitch length on these corners. This will give it a neater finish when we're done. When you're sewing this, I don't recommend starting on a corner because it can be hard to match it back up perfectly. So start on one of the long straight edges and then work your way back to there. We now want to cut this center line and these V's as close as you can possibly get to the stitching, but you do not want to cut your stitching. So you want either a very sharp pair of scissors or a craft knife. Now we're going to take this over to the iron and give it a good press. So you want to press all 4 sides like this so you get a crisp finish. Then you're going to pull it through to the back. This can feel a little bit awkward at first. And give it a good press all the way around so that it sits nice and flat and you've got a nice crisp edge here. Once that's all pressed, it should look like this. Don't underestimate how much the iron can help you to get rid of any creases that you have up here, but these are also to do with how close you've got to cutting your stitches. But again, you do not want to cut your stitches. Okay, so now you want to grab one of your zip pocket pieces. These are taller than they are wide. So you want to place them right side up, grab your zip tape and place that along the top edge. So your pocket is right side up, Your zip is right side up. Now we're going to sew that edge with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Scant is slightly less than. Okay, yours should just have one stitch line, but Adam did an 1/8 of an inch by accident. Okay, so that's a scant 1/4 inch that yours should be sewn with. Now grab your second pocket piece, place it right side up, and you're going to grab the other side of the zip tape and match it to that top edge. So make sure that your pocket pieces are lining up together on the sides. They are right sides together. And you're going to clip the zip so it's right side up, and so is the pocket piece. Going to do the same thing and sew that with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you want to take this over to the iron and press the zip flat. That will help us to fit it to the main panel easier. If you are using something like a polyester canvas and yours, you can't press it, you could just simply top stitch this zip down to make sure that it stays in place. Okay, so don't forget to fit your zip pull now. So I'm just going to slip that on, same as before, put the rounded edge on one side at a time. And then push down on a flat surface and pull it on. I'm going to bring it to the center. And I'm going to use some fabric glue, but you could use a little bit of double-sided tape. So I'm going to put it along the edges of the zip where it's not going to be visible because it's going to be in the seam. And the pocket pieces are open like this. Now I'm going to grab the main lining panel and place it on top. So your zip pocket facing should line up with your pocket. That's how you know it's centered. And you want the zip to center inside the box. And once that glue is sticking in place nicely, what we're going to do is we're going to sew all the way around this box with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. When you're doing this, make sure that your pocket pieces are still open. If your top one's hanging down, then as you sew, you will sew your pocket closed and it will be unusable. So you now want to turn your panel over and just make sure this top one is laying nice and flat. They're not going to match at the bottom because one of them is attached to the top of the zip. So one of them will be longer, which is absolutely fine. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab this longer one and fold that over. And then we're going to clip the pocket pieces together around the rest of the sides. Now we want to sew the sides and the bottom of the pocket closed. To do that, you're going to pull the main panel away because you don't want to sew through the main panel. So you just want to start up here, sew down the side, across the bottom, and up the other side. So that's your inner pockets done. Don't worry about the pen, it's an erasable pen, it will disappear over time. So the very last thing I'm just going to do is trim off where my pocket is coming wider than the panel over here. And then I'm going to set this aside and move on to the next step. Step 5 is the main closure. For this step, you're going to need your 34-inch zip and 2 zip pulls to go with that. You're going to want a 36-inch piece of binding. I'm going to use polyester waterproof canvas for this, so I'll show you how I'm going to do that. But you can just use standard cotton bias binding if you like. Then I've got my lining zip tab, which doesn't have any interfacing on the back, and the same with the second exterior zip tab. So both those pieces don't have interfacing. Then I've got my lining frame. My lining, you'll either have a lining main closure or your card slots piece. And then you're going to have the main closure and frame in your second exterior fabric too. So just to note, if you want to fit a handmade badge or a logo badge here, I would recommend fitting it now to this panel. I generally do mine about 1 3/4 inches up if I'm going to do one. So we'll start with your lining zip tab. I've measured and marked 2.5 inches in on the wrong side of the fabric. Then I'm going to grab my zip and I'm going to add my 2 zip pulls on. So this is continuous zip tape. and you can put a zip pull on from each side and they will then meet in the middle. Now grab your exterior zip tab and we're going to place that right sides together with the end of the zip and clip them together. If your zip is fraying at all, you can use a lighter really quickly just on nylon zips. That will help seal the end. Now I'm going to sew this with a 1-inch seam allowance. Now we're going to flip that over so we've got the wrong side of the zip, and we're going to place the lining zip tab right side down. Match that up with the end again, and you want to clip that in place. And you're also going to want to add a couple more clips beyond where this line is, just to make sure that the exterior and the lining zip tabs stay in line with the zip. Okay, like that. Now we're going to sew on the line that you marked there. So unclip those, and we're going to press both these fabrics away from the zip. You want to make sure that everything's kind of lined up. Now, I know this is a slightly strange way of doing this because we've got the zip going all the way through, but there is a reason, which I'll show you later. Okay, so you just want to top stitch here, and you're just going to be top stitching through all the layers there. Now we're going to bring just the exterior right sides together with the other end of the zip. So clip those together, and then we're going to sew it with an 1-inch seam allowance again. That's a whole inch. Now this last bit is going to be a little bit more awkward. We want to bring the remaining end of the lining round to the wrong side of the zip here. Okay, so the right side of the lining to the wrong side of the zip. It's going to feel like things are getting a little bit twisted, but it is fine. And again, we want to make sure that it's all straight in line with the zip, and then clip on the other side of the line that you've got on your lining. Okay, so this is how it's going to look. And again, we're going to sew on the line. Now you can unclip everything, and what should happen is as you pull it away from each other, everything is going to line up nice and neat. And your zip shouldn't have a gap, but it also shouldn't be overlapping, okay? So everything should just kind of slot between the two when you give it a nice little pull. Make sure everything's tucked in, and then it's all quite straight. And add a couple of clips down the side. Okay, so the reason we're having the zip go all the way through is because it's going to give the body of the bag the same amount of structure. If there wasn't the zip going through, then you'd just have the fabric and the bottom would kind of crease easily. This means that the zip goes all the way around, the whole of the main closure is going to have the same amount of structure. It gives it a nicer finish once the bag is done. So what we're just going to do is we're going to top stitch down here, and then we're going to baste these two long edges so that everything stays in place. Now your zip is ready, grab your exterior main closure. Now the centers should be marked on all of your pattern pieces already, and if they're not, you can do that now. Just going to get rid of these loose threads. You also want to mark the center on your zip on both ends. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the center mark on my zip to the top center mark on this main closure piece. We're going right sides together. I'm going to clip them together. Then you want to match the bottom center marks. And then I'm going to clip the zip to the panel, working around from the top. So we want to finish with those bottom corners. Okay, so as you get to your bottom corners, it's not quite going to fit. That is the way that we have intended for this to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to snip into the zip just a tiny bit, not much at all. And then you can either use a flame if you're using a nylon zip, or you could use a little bit of fray check on your zip just to make sure that it doesn't fray. Now, don't do this with striped zips because striped zips fray like crazy. So you just wanted to do that with like a normal zip like this one. So we're just going to clip that all the way around the corner. Now the reason that we wanted this to be smaller is because when we sew this with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're sewing a smaller circumference. So if this fitted straight away, then it wouldn't fit when you sew it. So that's why we're doing that. I'm just going to clip the other side to match. If you are choosing to treat your zip with a lighter, be very, very careful. You do not want to catch your fabric. You may want to detach your zip and then use that. Or you could just use some fray check. So now that's in place, what we're going to do is we're going to just baste that in place with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you struggle with your zips, just stop, backstitch a little bit, then you can take it out, move the zips, and then carry on. Now we're just going to sew with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the zip tab, only the zip tab. This is going to be our turning gap later, and this is going to make it much easier to get a neat finish after we've turned it. Now we need to fit the lining piece. So it's personal preference, but I find it slightly easier to do with most of the zip undone. I don't have it all the way down because I struggle with having those zip pulls in the way when I'm trying to do it, but figure out what works for you and then, have a go. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this right sides together so that it's on top and enclosing the whole of the exterior. Make sure that you've got your centers marked and match those up first. Right, and then we're just going to clip it the rest of the way around. So you just want to match these two panels up. Make sure that your zip is quite flat here. That will make it easier to sew. So watch out on these corners because you're going to get like a crease zip here. So I'm going to try and flatten it now, but also when we're sewing it, we're going to use the flathead screwdriver to push it flat as we're going around. So we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew it with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you'll need to change to either a zip foot or a very narrow foot like mine. What we want to do is we want to start and stop where the zip tab is. So we're not going to sew the zip tab area. So you just want to make sure that you mark your lining where the zip tab is. Start here, work your way around until there. Again, if you get stuck with the zip pulls, just do a couple of back stitches, pull it off the machine, move the zip pull out of the way, and then start again. So you now want to turn this out through your turning gap, which isn't always the easiest thing, but just take your time with it. This is when you're really glad if you used a cotton canvas like this. If you use vinyl, you will generally find that you have to heat it up with a hairdryer, and that will make it easier to turn. But check first how your vinyl reacts to a hairdryer. Like, try it with a scrap piece first, just in case. Make sure you push those bottom corners out. Oh, Adam's done a really nice job on those. And then push all of the curves out. So you could use a turning tool if you like, or a chopstick. I'm just going to use my fingers. And if you have any points of problem, okay, so we've got a little problem point here. Then you just need to take a note of where it is and pop it back out. We're just going to rip a couple of stitches, not too many, and just redo that little section. So spend a bit of time kind of pushing it all out. Take it over to the iron, give it a good press all around here, or if you don't have an ironable fabric, you could use a seam roller and give that a little press. I particularly find it helps when you do it from the inside. So we now need to close this turning gap. Now what we want to do is fold the lining in so that it's going to match. And I'm actually going to give that a press with the iron as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of glue along here. Push that down and then just clip it in place. Okay, once that is glued in place, you might just want to leave it for a couple of minutes, let it set nicely. I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine. I'm going to pop that zip up to make it slightly easier, and we're going to stitch from here to here, just from the zip tab or just past it. Make sure that you're using a thread that matches your exterior fabric, so it's not going to be visible or obviously visible. You don't need to top stitch the whole thing, and personally I prefer the look without, so that's why we're just doing this top stitch here to seal the turning gap. You could, if you prefer, hand stitch the lining gap closed, but for me it's easier to do on the machine. Okay, so set that aside for a moment. Now we're going to look at binding the zip. Now if you watch the preparation video, I explain this a bit more. I strongly recommend using this method for binding the zip to get a really neat finish on your bag. If you really don't want to bind the zip, then there is an alternative method in the pattern. So what I'm doing is I'm using a 1-inch wide piece of waterproof canvas. It's polyester, so it won't fray. There are other fabrics similar to this that you could use, or you can buy just cotton bias binding, which would work just as well. But you definitely don't want it to be more than 1/2 inch wide once it's folded. So I've cut this in a strip of 1 inch and I'm folding it and pressing it to get a nice crease. Now my binding is ready, I'm going to grab my frame pieces. So this is my exterior and my lining frame piece. And I'm going to place them wrong sides together and go ahead and clip those together. Now I'm going to take this over to the machine and we're going to baste the inside edge and the outside edge. Okay, so that is basted. Now what we're going to do is place the main closure lining side up. Place your frame lining side up. And the first thing you're going to do is match the center marks on your zip to the center mark on your frame, top and bottom. Now you're putting the exterior right sides together with the zip. Okay, so now my centers are clipped. I'm going to clip it around the rest of the opening. So you can see here my exterior is right sides together with the zip. So we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew it like this. And we're going to sew all the way around. I find this is the easiest way to get around those curves, is to have it on the machine like this. We're going to baste it because we're going to fit the binding on afterwards. So you can kind of use any seam allowance you want on this, 1/8, 1/4, whatever you feel more comfortable with, because we'll be sewing this on afterwards with 3/8 of an inch. Take your time on these bottom corners. They are really tough and you want to make sure that the fabric isn't kind of getting caught and wrinkled underneath. So just keep stopping regularly as you go around these corners and checking that everything is correct. Okay, so Adam's done a really nice job there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to flip that over. Now, if you do have anywhere that you've caught it, you know, along here, around these corners, just seam rip it and do it again. You want to get it right because this is going to be like the main focus of the bag. Okay, so what we're going to do is grab the binding and add that on. So I'll just get rid of loose thread. Now, it depends where you want your binding joint to be. I think I'm going to go with mine on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to just clip it around the whole seam. And I'm going to do this while looking at the outside, not like the inside of the zip. That's because we're going to be sewing looking at the inside of the zip. So I want to check that the stitches are covered on this side and that it's looking nice and neat. And then I can check the zip side when I'm actually sewing it. Now, just have a quick check and that your binding isn't getting too close to your zip, because you don't want it to get caught in your zip pulls or to stop them going around. So I can see I've got a nice bit of space there, so that's absolutely fine. If your binding is getting too close to the zips, you can always just place it so it's a little bit further over on the outside, and that will be absolutely fine. Okay, so my binding was a couple of inches short, but I just wanted to kind of stretch it around. I've just about made it, but for yours, if you've got enough left over, you can just fold it over so that you don't have this join being a raw edge. It's fine being a raw edge, but it might just look a little bit neater. So we're going to take this over to the sewing machine. Adam's going to sew this with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, we're going to sew it like this on the machine so we can get around those corners. Watch out that your fabric doesn't kind of get stuck underneath and then end up getting sewn through. Okay, so that is all sewn on. I recommend using a binding that matches the colour of your zip if you have it available to you. Then when you open the bag, it will just look like part of the zip. So that's a nice way to do it. But I definitely recommend using a thread colour that matches your binding. That way, if you miss it at any point, you can just kind of sew it again. You know, if there's a bit that's slipped off or something, you can sew it again. No one will ever know. So that is that panel done. If you have a tiny bit of creasing here, don't worry, because once the bag is attached to the gusset, it's going to kind of pull it all out and work out any little creases. You will find that it looks even better once it's fitted to the bag than it does right now. Step 6 is the straps and gusset. So you're going to need pretty much everything that you have left. If you're having it, you're going to need the extra base stabilizer. You need your 2 exterior gusset pieces, your 2 completed expanding pockets if you're having them, 2 strap tab pieces, your webbing grab handle and your 2 webbing straps, your lining gusset, the base overlay piece, the elastic bottle holder for inside, so this is just a wide piece of elastic, like a waistband elastic, your 2 rectangle rings, and if you want to use them, rivets, but these are optional. But before we actually start on this section, I want you to decide which way round you're going to wear the bag the most of the time. So it's reversible, you can wear it either way, but one way the hardware, the strap sliders are going to be the right way up, and the other way it's not. So personally, I want the plain panel against my back, and I want to wear this like showing off to the world. But if you're wearing it as an anti-theft backpack, then you're going to want this against your back. So the first thing that you need to decide is which fabric do you want, you know, showing outwards, showing out so everybody can see it when you're wearing the bag. For me, I'm going with this one. So this will be my primary fabric. So you need to remember that as you go through the pattern, it will say whether you need to use your primary fabric or not. So we're going to grab the 2 strap tab pieces, and you'll also need your 2 rectangle rings. So what we want to do first of all is fold these long edges into the center line. So you just draw a center line on the wrong side of the fabric, fold the edges in and press that with the iron. Do the same thing on the other side, give it a good press. Then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and top stitch both of the long edges. Do the same thing with your second strap tab. Now those are top stitched, we're going to put them through the rectangle ring here and fold them back on themselves. Now if you have quite a thin fabric, you may just want to put a strip of stabilizer in here before you do this. So I like to use just like a little bit of Decaville light that I can fuse onto it, something like that, just in the section that's going to be under a lot of pressure. So I just have a little strip of Decaville light here, and what I'm going to do is slip it between the layers and just fuse it in place before we attach the rectangle ring. So now we're going to put that through the rectangle ring, bring it back so that the ends meet and just clip it together. And what we're going to do is sew a line of stitching right up against the rectangle ring as close as we can get. So we'll change to a zipper foot for this. Make sure you're back stitching well and use a stitch colour that matches your fabric. Now you want to grab your primary fabric gusset. So this is the fabric that you want to be viewable to the world when you're wearing your bag. So we're going to need to mark it using the pattern piece. Now on the pattern piece it has this little dotted section, guide for strap tab placement. So you want to cut along these long lines. Now make sure that you have your fabric the right way around, because it's got a straight edge and a curved edge. See, so this is kind of curved, whereas this is straight. Match it up, you can even clip it in place if you like. And you're going to use an erasable fabric pen to mark the strap tab. So what you want to do now is place your strap tab on here. Now there was the mark up here, the short mark, is 1/2 inch in. It's a bit hard to see on mine because that fabric marking pen is not the best. But what you want is for your strap tab to be between the two lines at the right angle and for your rectangle ring to be 1/2 inch in. So the line is marking where the rectangle ring is. Okay, I'm going to clip that in place and then I'm going to baste that to keep it in place. Now I know we've got a lot of overhang, but this is to make sure that it's strong. If your strap tab ends where the seam ends, it's not going to have much strength, and then when the bag's in use it could rip out eventually. So make sure that you've got your overhang. Now we need to do the exact same thing on the other end of the same gusset. Make sure that your rectangle ring is pointing up toward the center of the gusset. If you're following your pattern placement, then you will be absolutely fine. Okay, so we've got both of those fitted on that primary fabric gusset now. So go back and find your center mark on the long straight edge. And on either side you want to mark it 3 3/4 inches out. And then what we're going to do is fit the grab handle. You want it to have about 1/2 inch hanging off the edge. This doesn't have to be absolutely accurate, but you just want to make sure you've got something there in the seam for added strength. Okay, and it's pointing out towards the curved side of the gusset. So I'm going to bring the other side back round to the other 3/4 inch mark. So that means you're going to end up with a 1.5 inch gap between these two parts of the grab handle. Okay, we're just going to baste that in place. Now we're going to take a strap, place it next to the grab handle. So I like to leave a 1/4 inch gap between my grab handle and straps. But if you are making this for a child or somebody with really narrow shoulders, you might want to put it right up against the grab handle so that it's closer to their neck if they have narrow shoulders. But I have found for me the perfect spot is 1/4 inch gap there. So I'm just going to clip that strap there. And the other one on the other side. So we've still got this 1/2 inch overhang here. to make sure that it's nice and secure. And we'll baste those in place. Okay, so this step is a little bit awkward because it's kind of floppy and got so many straps attached to it. But what we want to do is place these two exterior gusset pieces right sides together. Now, mine's got joins in it simply because I didn't have a fabric piece long enough, so just ignore that. Yours should be one piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match up the long straight edges, match the center marks first and clip those together. And then I'm just going to clip them together all the way down the length. Now those are clipped right sides together, we're going to sew the whole of this long edge using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we're also going to sew another seam just where the straps are and the strap tabs, about 1/4 of an inch, just to really reinforce those and give them some extra support. Now what we're going to do is press these seams under your primary fabric, okay? So your primary fabric is the one that's going to be on show when you're wearing the bag. So your straps are going towards the fabric that you want on your back most of the time. So it is reversible, but you know, if you want your hardware to be the right way up most of the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this seam. You could press it with an iron if you have fabrics that like the heat. So the seams are going toward the primary fabric, straps are coming toward the fabric that's on your back. Now we're going to top stitch the primary fabric all the way along. You might need a hump jumper to get over your straps and strap tabs. Now, if you're planning on having rivets, I recommend leaving them and fitting them later, which I'll be doing, because you want them to go through the lining and the stabilizer as well, so it's got loads of strength. So what we're going to do now is fit these expanding pockets. Now, one of them will fit on each side, so you can tell that one's wrong because it's not matching. So this is the one I need for this side, so that the fabrics match. And what we're going to do is we're going to push it down as close as we can get to the strap tab. And then just make sure it's level, so make sure that your zip is centered on that center seam, and then clip it to the gusset on the bottom edge. And then we're going to kind of pull the strap tab out of the way and sew that onto the gusset just on that bottom edge for now. We'll do the other side at the same time. So go ahead and do the same thing. Pop your pocket on there as close as you can get it to that strap tab. Make sure it's centered and clip it in place. We're just going to sew this bottom edge to begin with, and we'll do the sides in a minute. Okay, so now we're going to do the sides. What you need to do, because the pocket is going to be wider at the top, is you need to like bring it in so that it matches. Now, I try and do one side at a time, and Adam feels very strongly that you need to open the zip to do this. So I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so that is now matching. The bottom bit doesn't need to match absolutely perfectly, but then if you open it, it's going to make it easier to pull this side in. So you can see what Adam means here. If you leave your zip closed, it's going to like puff up in the middle and it's going to kind of fight you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to sew these sides. I would recommend sewing them both from the bottom to the top. So if there's any stretch, it's going to stretch in the same direction. And we'll do the other pocket on the other side in exactly the same way. Okay, so that's your pockets fitted. You'll see now when you zip them up that they are puffing out. That is correct. We want it to kind of come out from the bag a little bit. So now what we're going to do is place the short ends of the gusset right side together and just clip those together. Now if, like me, you've got one fabric that's stretched a little bit more than the other, you can just trim those to match. So those are matching better now. So I'm going to put these right sides together and clip that short end. I'm going to sew this seam with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're just going to press this seam open on the bottom, because what we want it really is for it to lay flat before we fit the extra base stabilizer. So I'm going to top stitch this down on both sides. This will be hidden under the base overlay, so it doesn't need to be neat, but we're just going to top stitch it so it stays flat. Now we're ready to fit the extra base stabilizer. So I've drawn a line up the center, and then I've drawn a line 3 inches out on each side. Now this is fusible, so I could fuse it to the gusset, but I find that it doesn't want to stay put very well because the gusset's just moving around during the construction of the bag. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of double-sided tape just to hold it in place for a moment, and then I'm going to stitch it down because the base overlay will hide the stitching. So this stabilizer is extra firm, which is why it's 1/2 inch in from each side, so it's not going to be in the seams. You don't want your extra firm stabilizer in your seams. Right, and we're just going to sew down these lines to create a 6-inch wide box. But this stitching will be hidden later, so it doesn't need to be perfect. So now we want to grab the base overlay and mark it 1 inch in from each of these short edges. Then I've added some double-sided tape to the edge so that I can fold these short ends in. And you want to fold them into that line and give that a nice little press. Then I'm going to add a little bit of double-sided tape here. So I'm going to keep this out of my seams because I've already got some double-sided tape here. I don't want to be sewing through 2 lots. Now make sure that the centers are marked on your base overlay. And what we're going to do is turn this gusset right side out. We're going to match those center marks, place it right over the top, and we're going to sew on all 4 edges using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's your exterior gusset ready. Just slide that aside for a moment and grab your lining gusset. Don't worry, the lining gusset is much quicker to assemble. So the first thing you're going to do is measure 10 inches up from one of the short ends, and then you want to fit your elastic, a waistband kind of elastic here. This is going to be to hold a bottle inside the bag. So we're just going to baste those 2 sides. So now you want to bring the 2 short ends of your gusset right sides together and just clip those together. And we're going to sew that with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to take this to the iron and press that seam open. If you prefer, you could top stitch it open, but just bear in mind that your top stitching will show on the inside of the bag. Now it's time to put the lining gusset inside the exterior gusset. So we need to match up the centers first. So I'm going to match my base seams together. And then I'm going to match these top center seams too. So make sure that your lining is right side out and your exterior is right side out as well. Now I'm going to clip the rest of that together. Just bear in mind that the lining pattern piece is ever so slightly smaller than the exterior. That's to account for the fact that it's on the inside and also that it has the stabilizer in between. If it was the exact same size, the lining would kind of end up being too big and too baggy. Okay, now we're ready. We're going to take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew both sides all of the way around. So we're just going to baste it with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so that is your gusset sewn together. Now if you want to add rivets, I would recommend doing it now so that it's going through the exterior, the foam and the lining. That will give it extra security. I'm going to go ahead and fit rivets just through my straps. Now this is optional, you don't have to fit rivets if you don't want to. I've got this rivet template which is quite handy, so I'm going to fit one just down here, making sure it's centered on that strap. I'm not going to add them to my grab handle. Then I've got this tiny little cutting mat and a Japanese hole punch. I'm going to take that over to my hand press and set those rivets, and then I'm going to do the same thing just here for my strap tabs. So provided you put them through here, then that is going to be fine. You're still going to be able to use the bag reversible, not going to make any difference. If you decide to rivet it on this side, then you might have a bit of a problem with one of the directions. So make sure that you're putting it through the side that's going to allow it to move around still. That's your gusset done. Now we can move on to the final step. Step 7 is final assembly. For this step, you're going to need your whole bag. So we've got the gusset, and this is the main closure panel, and this is the other main panel. So the first thing we're going to do is place this main exterior panel wrong sides together with the main lining panel. Make sure that you get them lined up neatly and clip them together. And we're going to baste those panels together with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now we're on to the really exciting bit. So I'm just going to put this main panel aside for a moment. And we're going to work with the main closure. So you should have the tops and bottom centers marked on everything. And if you haven't, do that now. And then what we're going to do is place this exterior side up as it is. Clip together your straps so they don't get in your way. It will just make life a little bit easier. And we want to turn the gusset so that it's lining side out. You're going to get the fabric that matches the gusset to the exterior panel that we're working on, and you're going to match up your center marks. So match those at the top and the bottom. And then we're going to clip them together around the top next. So this is exterior right sides together, the whole thing. And I'm going to clip these bigger curves at the top first and then work our way down to those bottom curves as they're more tricky. So like we did with the zip earlier, we're going to have where it looks like the gusset's too small. This is correct because the circumference of what you're actually sewing is a lot smaller than the circumference of what you're clipping. So we need the gusset to be smaller or it's not going to be right when you sew it. So what we're going to do is we're going to snip into the gusset just a bit, no more than 1/4 of an inch, because you don't want this getting into your, showing outside of your seam. So I'm just going to do that around the curve. And then it's going to let me spread the fabric so that it stretches around this curve. So this is going to allow me to sew that 3/8 of an inch without having loads of extra fabric in there, which would then create puckers. So I'm going to go ahead and clip the other side in the same way. Now we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew this on with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you find curves like this tricky, I would recommend just hand basting a few stitches around the curve. It doesn't need to be neat. It can just be within the seam allowance and then it will stay in place. Whereas the clips can kind of move a little bit. I'd also recommend using like an awl or a flathead screwdriver to hold the fabric in place ahead of the presser foot. But just be careful you don't get too close to the presser foot. We're sewing the gusset with a scant 3/8 of an inch seam allowance because then we'll sew the binding on with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance so the stitches aren't going directly over the top of each other. Now we're ready to fit the binding. So binding isn't the most fun thing, but it's a really, really good way to give the bag structure. I'm going to start my join at the top because I figure that's the place that people aren't really going to look because you're looking into the bag from this front zip. So I'm going to go ahead and start clipping that, and I want this binding to clip all the way around the bag, and it should just be covering the stitching that you've just shown. If, like me, you're using a polyester canvas, you may want to cut it 1 1/8 inches wide. That will just give you that little bit of extra room to get around a bulky seam, but it does depend what fabrics you're using and how much bulk there is. So there's lots of ways to do binding, but this is how I do mine. I prefer to clip it over the whole seam and sew it just the once. A lot of people will sew one side and then bring it over, but everybody has their different preferred ways. If you've not tried this way, I actually really enjoy it. I definitely recommend using a matching stitch colour, so just in case you miss a little bit, then you can sew it again and it's not going to be visible to anybody. So we'll take that over to the sewing machine now and sew that on with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Before you go any further, just check that you've actually caught the binding everywhere and just redo any bits that need redoing. So we're going to attach the last panel now. If you want to, you could open your zips now, totally up to you. If you don't do them now, you can just do them from the back later on, so it's not a problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place this, so it's going to be exteriors together, matching my green to my green. And I'm going to clip the bottoms together first. Then I'm going to match the top center marks together. And just like we did on the other panel, I'm going to clip around from the top first, and we're going to finish with those bottom curves. So on the bottom curves, you are going to need to snip into your gusset just a tiny bit again. So we're just doing little snips. Definitely no more than 1/4 of an inch. And then you can stretch that to fit around the curve. Now that's all clipped, I'm just going to hand baste those bottom corners again just to make it a little bit easier to sew. And then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew the whole thing with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. This side is going to be slightly tougher because the gusset is going to be kind of making the bag get in the way. Don't be afraid to squash the bag down as you're sewing it as you need to. Okay, you're almost there, don't give up. So here we go. We're going to attach the binding to this panel. So again, I'm going to start in the top at the center, and I'm just going to clip this all the way around the seam. Going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew that binding on with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, that's your main bag done. So what we're going to do now is turn the bag right side out. If you're using a really stiff vinyl, you might want to heat it up with a hairdryer before you turn it out, but again, check on an offcut first to see how it reacts. What we want to do is push the binding toward the gusset, and this will help give like a nice uniform finish around these seams. Spend a while pushing out these corners. Now you can see here what I meant earlier, there was a tiny crease here before. It's completely gone now that it's sewn into the seam. So it always kind of looks better on the finished bag. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. So what we need to do now is the straps. So grab each of your straps so that it's coming down the side of the bag that it corresponds to. And you want to put a strap slider on each, so we're going up and over the middle bar. Then you're going to come from the outside of the bag toward the center like that. And what we want to do with this end is go up and over the middle bar again, but it's going underneath that first part of the strap, okay? And I'm going to fold the end under itself like this. Okay, before you go any further, add a clip and just check that your strap is adjustable. Then you know you've clipped the right bit and you're not going to sew through the wrong bit, because you do not want to sew through this upper section of the strap. Now, if you have nylon webbing, depending on the thickness of it, you may want to add something just so it doesn't slide too easily. So I'm going to put a little bit of stabilizer in there. I don't want this to be visible, so I've cut it a little bit smaller than the width of the strap. And then what I'm going to do is add a rivet through here, through the whole lot. Now, if you don't have rivets, that is absolutely fine. You can sew this instead. And if you're sewing, you're just going to want to sew a couple of straight lines across here to hold it all in place. And if this is a bit tight for you, feel free to make it slightly bigger with the fold over. That is absolutely fine. So I'm going to set that rivet, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other strap. And then we're done. So there is our finished bag. I'm actually really happy with that, even though green isn't normally my colour choice. Let's have a look at the inside. Yeah, I think that looks really nice. I'm really happy with that. The canvas that we used for this video is one of our water resistant canvases that we have. We stock this from time to time. Also the hardware, zips, webbing, everything like that. So if you're looking for any of that, join our Country Cow Designs mailing list, and then you get to know when we have new products available and things like that. Now, I don't have another bag to show you for our next tutorial yet. We have a couple, well, more than a couple actually, of bags in the works, but we keep really experimenting with the prototypes and changing them quite drastically. So if I show you one of the prototypes, it's not going to be what the finished bag is. So nothing to show you today, but make sure that you are subscribed to our mailing list so you hear first about our next new pattern. We definitely have a tote coming up this year, and probably we're also going to have a baby backpack, which I'm quite excited about. So thanks for joining me, and see you soon.